से ब्लूटूथ डाल सकते हो सर।
Very good afternoon to one and all. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Good afternoon.
Sir, you're audible.
Yeah, my name is Dr. Prachet. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Epidemiology. So, we welcome you all to this mental health dialogue program on the theme mental health in workplaces. So, this is an initiative of the National Mental Health Survey 2. So, as we all know, National Mental Health Survey or NMHS is a nationwide community survey which is being conducted across all the states and union territories of India. And Mental Health Dialogue is a platform to facilitate academic interaction and for bringing like-minded people who have been committed for the conduct of NMHS2 together. So through this interaction, we would like to expand the sphere of influence for public mental health. So like I said earlier, the theme for today's webinar is mental health at workplaces. So this was also the theme for the World Mental Health Day 2024. And this theme highlights the significance between mental health and work and the need to create safe and healthy working environments. So through this webinar, we hope to raise awareness of pertinent mental health issues and we hope that we will learn a lot from our experts. So it's very imperative to encourage support for those who experience mental health issues at workplace and to take appropriate action to improve mental health at work. And this is not one person's responsibility. Multiple stakeholders like the employers, employees, governments, and other stakeholders have to come together. They need to collaborate in order to improve mental health at work. So on that note, we are all very happy to welcome you. So I request Mr. Vishak, who is Program Coordinator of NMHS2, to kindly do the needful.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Vishak, Program Coordinator for NMHS2, and I will be facilitating today's mental health dialogue on mental health in workplaces. Our session today will be divided into two parts. The first segment will feature presentations from our eminent speakers, followed by a panel discussion with the experts. Before we start, just a quick note, each presentation will be about 10 minutes long. I kindly ask participants to post questions, if any, in the chat box, and we will address some of them at the end of the first segment. With that said, let's proceed with the presentations for our first session. With immense pleasure, I would now like to invite the first speaker for today's session, Dr. Gautam MS, Additional Professor in the Department of Epidemiology at NIMHANS and Head of the WHO Collaborating Center for Injury Prevention and Safety Promotion. A leading expert in occupational health and workplace safety, Dr. Gautam has developed key tools like the TAWS-16 for assessing work-related stress and facilitated mental health screenings in numerous industries. Today, he will share his expertise on work stress and its impact on workplaces. Dr. Gautam, welcome and over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir, for the invitation. So may I now request Dr. Prachet to just put the slides for the convenience of everyone?
Yes, sure. 1 minute.
So it's nice talking to you on the theme of this year's World Mental Health Day. And as you all are aware that stress and work stress, even though they come from the same conceptual background, but the determinants and the management aspects might vary to some extent between managing general stressors of life as well as workplace stressors. So it's one question that everyone asks is, what is work stress? I mean, what is stress? Is stress really required in life? Or what is that cutoff point? Or is there a point at all to define that this is a good stress and this is an harmful level of stress? So these were some of the questions that were lingering in our mind for quite some time. May I request the next slide, please, Prachit? Yeah. So as you can see in this slide, that whenever we are placed with demands that is beyond the ability of the perceived ability of us to respond to the demand, that is when the stress starts. Basically, whenever there's pressure and extreme demand placed on the person, beyond his ability to cope. I mean, that's a very important word, beyond our ability to cope. And how do we define our abilities to cope? It's basically based on our capacities to manage the problem, based on our previous experiences to manage the demand that is placed on us, based on the training that I've received, based on the training that I've received basically to manage the problem. So, in case when there is a feeling, a subjective feeling that whenever I'm asked to do something and I personally feel that it's beyond my capacities to do it, that is when the construct of stress starts setting in. So, work related stress is basically whenever we are placed with certain work related stressors. Stressors are something that lead to stress. And I perceive when the person perceives that it is difficult for him or her to cope with the work stressor, and that is when work related stress starts to kick in. And normally, stress is required in life. I am an advocate that some amount of stress is required. I call it as the use stress. Stress is required for evolution, growth, for the growth of the domain, for the growth of our personal lives. Is even good for building our character as well. But a certain amount of stress that is harmful to us is distress. That is the harmful levels of work stress. It can affect both the individuals as well as organizations, and that is what I'll be talking about today. The reason why I would say, next slide, please. The reason why I would say it's harmful is we need to understand this what happens to us whenever we are asked to do something, whenever we face a stressor in life, whenever we are given some deadlines, whenever we are given to do some work that is expected to be done by 10 people, but I am asked to do alone. So, based on our previous experiences and abilities, the brain basically processes this information, pulls out our stored memory, and then there is the limbic system is activated. So, and hormones are released. The hypothalamus and pituitary gland tells the adrenal gland that this is something that you're faced and you need to respond to this. Normally, whenever we are faced with acute events, there is release of adrenaline and noradrenaline, that is epinephrine and norepinephrine is released. That makes us better prepared to manage some emergency situations. But whenever the adrenal cortex, the outer part of the adrenal gland, is stimulated because of the emotions that arise because of excessive stressor experience, steroid hormones are released for a long period of time. So I repeat, it's the long-term exposure to stressor that is quite dangerous rather than a short-term exposure to stressor. Whenever the steroid is released for a long period of time, it basically affects the sodium retention and increases the blood volume as well as the blood pressure. It increases the blood glucose level, it suppresses our immune system. And this is where what I would define as something that is basically harmful to the person. So, a level of stress or a stressor experience that is beyond the ability of the person to cope, that basically affects this pituitary and adrenal axis, such that there is a lot of rise in blood pressure, rise in blood glucose, suppression of the immune system. So, that things for a long period of time is an harmful level of stress. Next slide, please. So, what we are interested is basically the harmful levels of stress. And to get harmful levels of stress, we need to get exposed to work stressors. So it's a clear-cut pathogenic process. So there are various kinds of work stressors which are intrinsic to the job, like the place we are working is having poor physical working conditions, excessive exposure to heat, noise, but yet I'm required to concentrate and perform and deliver with good amount of cost effectiveness. There's a lot of time pressure on me. There's a lot of deadlines that is there. And I'm also in a position that is of high responsibility and accountability. These are certain stressors that basically put a person into a lot of work pressure that we call. And suppose there's a conflict, there's a role in the organization. That is, I am employed, but I don't know what to do. There's very ambiguous role. There's role conflicts. And I work for a long duration of time for many years, but I'm not promoted. That is, there are issues in career development. So whenever there are issues in career development, either as an lack of job security, and then when there is very poor interpersonal relationship between employees at work. So, and there is the organization structure is that it's really not conducive for a person to work and express himself freely. These are all certain things that we call them as work-related stressors. So they operate in the workplace, they manifest in the workplace, they're present for a long duration of time, and if you're unable to cope with it, we obviously get stressed. So this is what we and because of these exposures, there can be changes both in the individual level as well as in the organization as well. So there are changes both in the individual level as well as in the organization level. What happens to the individual person because of the alteration of the pituitary adrenal axis? There is a lot of changes in the heart rate, blood pressure. Then there are, as an escape mechanism, people often resort to substance use. Then this distress sets in. Then there is common mental health problems that basically sets in. So there are a lot of issues that happen at the individual level, the health problems, and one leading to other. And sometimes work stress is both a cause and consequence of many non-communicable disorders. But we should also remember that there is also a lot of effects that is observed in the organization as such. If you look at the organization, what is an indicator of that there's a lot of work stress in the organization? Indirectly, we see that reduced productivity, high sickness absenteeism, high amount of labor turnover, and there's a lot of strikes, and then there's repeated complaints and poor quality control mechanism. These are all the telltale signs within an organization that all is not right. There is some amount of stress that is widely prevalent among the employees. At an individual level, over a period of time, people can develop coronary heart disease, strokes, and mental disorders, and diabetes, hypertension. And that is when they come in contact with some amount of formal or informal healthcare system. But it's our duty that we even intervene at a much earlier stage. And as you can see, the work stress is not in isolation. It's a part of the overall pathogenic process that operates in any workplace. Could be an industry, could be a factory, could be an IT company. Next slide, please, Dr. Rajat. So how do we manage it? So to manage it, we have to understand the physiology that the work stress arises because our axis is stimulated. So we have to do something so that there's a decreased stimulation, or the arousal system of this axis and release of hormones is not so much. And the basic reason we get stress is because we are having some related work-related stressor exposure, deadlines, pressures. So to manage that, it requires a lot of organization-related changes that may not be achieved immediately. It will take some time for organization-related changes to come into place, but we should have efforts in this direction. So a balance of strategies that are required to protect the employee who is affected by ensuring that he is able to better cope. When I say he is able to better cope, the stressor exposure should not release hormones on a chronic level so that it can damage him or his performance. And when I'm talking about decreasing the stressor, I'm talking about what are the things the organization should do so that these stressors that lead to stress actually are reduced to a maximum extent possible. So in simple terms, the stress management is not going to parties, is not having a stress buster parties. It's about doing things that reduces the effects of stress on the employees, at the same time doing things at the organization level that ensures that stressors are not manifested in the organization. So I will just narrate our experiences. So what we basically need is we need to measure stress on a regular basis, that we need to have a screening mechanism for stress. Based on the screening mechanism, we should be able to have an objective measurement as who is having stress, who is having harmful levels of stress, and who is not having. Based on that, we can identify certain risk groups, which part of the workplace is having stress. So that will necessitate a work stress audit in that particular place to understand the workflow and process as to why people are having stress in particular place. And then implement a workplace related interventions as well as certain high risk interventions. High risk intervention is there are some interventions that cover the entire workplace, but some interventions is very required specifically for people who are at a very high level of risk. And again, the screening cycle continues. So it's basically a sort of identification, risk stratification, management at the individual and workplace level. This cycle continues, and this is the whole principle or concept behind having a good stress management program. So when we talk about that, one of the major issues that I faced way back in the year 2013-14 is to actually identify stress. So when we want to identify work-related stress, there are very limited number of tools that was available to identify work-related stress. That takes into account the whole definition of stress, that basically measures the stressor experience over a period of 5 to 6 months, and then measures the ability of the employees to cope with the exposed stressor and combines these to basically give a measure of what's an harmful level of stress. So we actually developed an instrument that basically does this, and then it's called as the tool to assess and classify work-related stress. It's being widely used in many industries, and it's being used to measure stress. Next slide, Dr. Prajit. So this is about the work stress tool that I was talking. It's called the tool to assess and classify work-related stress. Next slide, please. And this slide, basically, the objective is to screen for harmful levels of work stress, screen for symptoms suggestive of harmful level of work stress, identify certain important work stressors in the organization, and then provide recommendations based on the observations. I will not go into details of the tool. Next slide, please, for the paucity of time. So we even have an instruction manual both in English and Kannada and even in other regional languages for people to basically use this tool to do the first part of the work, that is to screen people for work stress. Next slide, please. So this tool is also valid, reliable. It's been published and it's available for people to read up about this. Next slide. So the tool basically assesses the key important domains. I mean, we have to, if we are trying to measure work stress, we have to measure the organization related factors, role overload related factors, ambiguity related factors, career development factors, effort reward imbalance, job security, the support provided by the organization, work-life balance, and various organization environment and related factors. This helps us make an understanding of what is the stressor exposure that the person is present, and this tool basically does that. And at the end of the assessment, next slide, please. At the end of the assessment, basically what we see is each person is categorized having no stress, mild stress, moderate stress, and severe stress. The beauty of this is based on exposure to stressor and based on presence of psychosomatic symptoms suggestive of work stress, employee is graded into different codes. And based on this grading, on the scores, the recommendations are also suggested, whether is just follow-up is required, repeat assessment and some amount of counseling is required, or the stress level is such that he needs a detailed workup to understand the factors associated with stress, and he needs a targeted stress management training to decrease the arousal mechanism, to decrease the release of hormones, help him better cope with the work, or it is so much that he needs a detailed workup for non-communicable diseases and do some blood investigations and then look for any presence of heart disease and diabetes and hypertension and those kind of things. Can you go to the next slide? I would just give an example of, I would not say which workplace it is, but basically one of the good way of doing stress management techniques is that we ensure that most of the red is shifted to green. That is the people who are having severe symptoms suggestive of stress, as well as people who are having a high level of work stress. When we do this assessment, I told a triad of screening, identification, and interventions repeatedly, we want to shift as many people from the red to the green as possible. That is with no stress or with mild stress. And next slide, please. And it's just because you are exposed to the stressor, it doesn't mean that you are actually going to have work stress, because humans have an uncanny ability to cope with problems that are present on them. I give an example of this is one of the industries that we have done. You see that many employees basically reported exposure to deadlines, multitasking, and various issues. You see there is more than 50%, but actually only 17% had harmful levels of work stress. So what I'm trying to say is it's not just the exposure to stressor, it's also the individual ability to cope is most important. Both the things are required whenever we are going to define the harmful levels of work stress in the individual. Next slide, please. And whenever we are attempting to manage work stress, I am really not an advocate that it must be done in isolation. It must be part of the overall what you call wellness program in the industry, an integrated approach where we are looking at control of non-communicable diseases as such, and stress is one aspect of it. We are controlling mental health problems, non-communicable diseases, and that is why we see most of the programs that we do in industries is really not a stress-related program. We have developed guidelines for control of non-communicable diseases. We have an NCD meter for workplaces that basically looks at how the workplace is ready to manage NCDs, and the stress is one part of the overall instrument. And whenever you are interested to understand stress and manage stress in organization, I would strongly recommend that it goes as a complete package as overall health promotion program or a larger NCD control program. That the buy-in is more important, but because even still some amount of stigma is there for mental health even in the best of places. Next slide, please. So at the individual level, I would just say that we have to do things that basically protect the individual or the employee. He should be taught regarding the optimum sleep, the relaxation technique, so that the emotional stimulation from the limbic system does not lead to release of excessive hormones for a prolonged period of time. Regular exercise to control this release, effective communication, learning to say no is a very important way to ensure that this primary response in the limbic system is not even activated in the first place. Time management, anger management, and health eating. These are sort of solid techniques for stress management at the individual level, and these techniques basically help the individual not to fall prey to develop harmful levels of work stress. So it's not just going to parties that are going to reduce stress. Next slide, please. And at the organization level, we have to reduce the release of stressors. So having a workplace policy for health, having a system where there's a periodic screening for work stress and problems and non-communicable diseases, providing enabling environments for employees to have an healthy diet, exercise, providing an enabling environment where there's a system for access to counseling services as well as regular screening services, having a stress audit of all the departments, especially those which are reporting high levels of stress, understanding the workflow patterns, having regular and updated training for employees in the work process. That's very important. Whenever we introduce a new software, whenever we introduce a new department, whenever we introduce a new section, it's very important that the employees are trained perfectly in the way how they are expected to function. Otherwise, that's going to have a lot of stress. And that's there the importance of induction training and repeated and reinforcement trainings come into play. And involving the employees in decision making regarding work process, that's a very important thing according to me. That basically it also gets the employee buy-in as well as it enhances the productivity in the long run. So having regular and fair appraisals and ensuring that employees are having some amount of job security and social security is sort of organizational matters that basically help to reduce the amount of stress. So with this, I would like to end by saying that work stress is a construct that is presented because of the combination of exposure to work stressors and inability of the employees to cope with the work stressors. If this exists for a prolonged period of time, then there is going to be harmful effects, both physiological on the individual that can lead to various non-communicable diseases in future. It also affects the organization where there's a decreased productivity and the value of the enterprise goes down due to absenteeism, strikes, and other issues. And how we reduce this? We need to have a system where there's a periodic identification, stratify the risk of people who are having stress, and then they should be exposed to both individual level strategies as well as the overall company level strategies to reduce the work stress. So with this, I would like to end my presentation by acknowledging the director, registrar, and entire management of NIMHANS and the faculty and staff of Department of Epidemiology, the entire MHT team, as well as some people who have really helped or have been with me throughout this journey of occupational health. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gautam, for your insightful presentation on work stress. Your focus on both individual strategies and organizational solutions highlights the importance of a holistic approach. Your insights offer practical pathways to healthier workplaces. We deeply appreciate your valuable contribution. Once again, I thank you for your insightful presentation, sir. With great delight, I now invite the next speaker for today's MST. It's an honor to introduce Dr. Sai Krishna Tikka, Additional Professor of Psychiatry at AIIMS Bibinagar, Hyderabad. Dr. Tikka is a renowned expert in psychiatry with over 100 PubMed indexed publications in the past decade and an impressive H-index of 22. His primary areas of focus include advancing cognitive neurophysiology, exploring innovative non-invasive brain stimulation techniques and understanding psychotic disorders. Dr. Tika brings invaluable insights of today's session on strategies to protect and maintain workplace mental health. Doctor, we are delighted to have you with us. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Hope I am audible.
Yes, sir, you are audible. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Prajit, for inviting me on this very good platform, and a very good brief about how to measure, and then overview of how to manage at individual and organizational level by Dr. Gautam. In fact, that talk is a very good prelude to the strategies which I am going to tell. And I would also like to declare that, unlike Dr. Gautam, who has been working in occupational health and mental health, I am not into, specific research interest into workplace and mental health. But then, as part of, different organizations, being a different hierarchy, starting from being a student, to now at an administrative level, there are different strategies we use day in and day out to protect and maintain mental health, and this particular session will be a brief overview of that. So the layout of my the presentation will be initially on prevention of mental health challenges. How do we do that? And a bit about promoting resilience and achieving work-life balance. In fact, all of us are stressed at every point of time. Like Dr. Gautam was telling me, some amount of stress is definitely required because that is how it builds our character. But even to level of distress, every day we feel the distress, and it can be during day, then during night. And like Dr. Gautam said, there are different management strategies when it comes to managing stress at an individual level. Be it personal stress at a familial level, a relationship stress, or it is age-related stress in geriatric population, or coming to the workplace stress. But in this talk, I'm not going to go into details about all these things at individual level. But what to be done at a group level or at a workplace level is what we will see. To start off, what are the sources of workplace stress? The duty hours, the lack of reward system which is there in the system, and the lack of acknowledgements, lack of job security in many places. It happens and we're not sure about how long we're going to work at a particular place, and when are we are not sure when are we going to be remote. Now there's a lot of office politics that happens. There's unfairness. There's a lot of bias, and all these factors come together actually bring in a lot of workplace stress. And to doctors especially, the very, very important factor is something called as a physician morale, wherein we have that excessive responsibility of taking care of the society. So that is another big source of workplace stress, especially in hospitals. Beyond that, again, this is specific to doctors, lack of control. We don't know what will happen, and unpredictability, especially in emergency settings. Intense sense of responsibility, change in the type of treatment regimes that are there. That sometimes what happens is the treatment regimes are so rapidly changing that it's very difficult to get a hold of that. Finances at individual level and their regulation, all these are sources of stress. And when these sources are all there, it's it's certain that mental health challenges are going to definitely come to us. The question here is, can we prevent them? Dr. Gautam spoke about how to manage them, but can we prevent them? The best way of preventing the situation is avoiding the situation. But is it possible? Is it really possible that we can avoid situation? And avoiding situation here means actually avoiding work, which is unlikely to happen. So in place of avoiding situation, what we can do is, there's a possibility that we can alter the situation. And how do we alter the situation? So that is by expressing your feelings, which instead of bottling them up. Like Dr. Gautam again spoke about effective communication, that comes into picture here, and be willing to compromise. Sometimes many people say there are ego clashes. What are ego clashes? Because there's no one who is ready to compromise there. So being the willingness to compromise is actually altering the situation. Adapting to the stressor, it can be reframing the problem that is there at hand, looking at a big picture from upwards, adjusting your standards. You might not always stick to one particular point, but then you have that flexibility in the standard that you have. Focus on the positives of, be it be it in a unrewarding situation. Accepting that things can't change. Looking from upside, like I've sort of told, having a bigger view, learn to forgive, don't try to control the uncontrollable. Coming to, what is uncontrollable, or rather what is controllable. What's controllable is our behavior. Most of these sources of work stress are not controllable. But what we can do is we can control our behavior. How do we do that? Being more assertive, getting better organized, delegating our work, ventilation, use of humor, diversion, distraction. I'll come to each of these one by one. Assertiveness skills are very, very important. Taking a firm, steady stance at anything that is there is very important to avoid work stress. That you can do by using body language as well, or even verbal communication. And it's very important that we have to be concise and to the point. Negotiating for purpose of fulfilling needs without overriding the needs of others. It shouldn't matter at what others feel at times, where that's what is assertiveness. When your mental health stress, your mental health well-being is at stake. Getting organized, here time management is a very important skill for getting organized. Prioritizing objectives, duties, activities, which has to be done today, what I can do it tomorrow. Those things, having a particular schedule in a timetable of things that are there, that is very important. Avoiding personal and professional chaos. That means, a mixture of professional issues and professional and personal issues. We'll come to work-life balance a little later. We'll discuss a little bit more there. Delegating, what most important factor in work-related stress is, inability to delegate. If the work is given to you, you tend to, take entire responsibility of that thing. It's rather better to delegate that thing. And now what's important is to know that delegating is not letting others become experts. It's just sharing. And what we also need to understand is we have to resist perfectionism. That you want certain things to be done perfectly so that you do it on yourself. You can't delegate. If you can resist that perfectionism, in fact, you will end up having less amount of work stress. Say no to micromanagement. As because you want perfectionism, you go and deal every small thing that you delegate. Even in delegation, what's important is you shouldn't micromanage. Once you have delegated a work, just forget about it. Have confidence in that person to come, be good, and come back with results. Ventilation. It's said that a problem shared is a problem halved. So developing support network through friends and colleagues, where we can talk to, that's very important. Even you have no one to talk to, it's important. It'll be useful if you have a diary, notes. Now, what's important there is not to reread what you have written. That's very important aspect of ventilation when it comes to diary writing. Use of humor. Use of humor in any situation can bring down the level of stress tremendously down. Maybe the stress level is 100. Use of some humor around the same situation brings it down to say 80, 70, sometimes even less. Diversion and distractions. Diversion and distraction should be workplace related. Say, for example, I have a company with 20 people. I take them out, to distant holiday on distant holidays, and that can act as a diversion and distraction. Motivate the individuals and also groups to take up something which is an alternative. Sports, it can be music, something else which they have an alternate motivation to. Now coming to what is called as promoting resilience. I believe resilience is mostly in our character. It's there in our character. It is there in our genes. And like Dr. Gautam was telling me, humans have an uncanny, character to just deal with things. But what we have to understand is we have to understand that resilience, that resilience which is there within us. So we have a tendency to overestimate the emotional impact of any event, both in terms of intensity and duration. We tend to feel that, it is quite the worst thing that has happened, and it has happened for so long, that is the emotional impact that it is there. But what we do is we underestimate our own resilience. In fact, we get over the worst things that can happen to us, in some time. So that particular resilience, it may be, to a different level in each of us. Someone will be more resilient than the other, but we all have, human beings have that, resilience within us to actually fight stress out. What else? Invest in experience than the goal. You have to tell your, staff, tell yourself also that, experience is more important than the goal. Savoring is actually stepping out of the experience to review and appreciate what you have done, what just happened. Just stay, as an outsider, have a view on that. Show gratitude, appreciate and be thankful to what you have, and set smart goals. What are smart goals? I'm not going to details of this. Smart goals are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and goals. So, those setting such goals is what is important. Creating environment where everyone is satisfied is very, very difficult. But it's important that, we have to thrive to do that. How to do that is, having rewards, incentives. It may not be always financial. It can be social outings. You can plan something which is, daily social, like having a cup of tea with, 4 or 5 people among you, going for a weekly outing, a monthly social outing. So such things are actually also act as a very good rewards and incentives. And you have to create a culture of dignity and security. Everyone is, dignified. You have to talk to everyone in a proper manner, irrespective of what is the grade of hierarchy it is. And it's important that when I talk about hierarchy, not to promote hierarchy at any level. It may be at a boss and a subordinate, but when you come out, that hierarchy should be off. Effective communication is very important, in handling that. In effective communication, there are 3 principles. Assertiveness, we already spoke about that. Inquiry, we have to allow others to ask questions, probe questions, which are gentle in nature. They have to have that freedom to ask questions. And empathy, of course, we'll all have to make that effort to explain others what is empathy and how empathy can, reduce work stress. Achieving work-life balance. At some time, when we talk about work-life balance, we think it's actually a myth. There's nothing called work-life balance. It just cannot happen. Like you see here, this guy is actually taking out all the stress which is there during the office before going to home. So in technical terms, we call it as dissociation. We dissociate what happens in work, and we don't carry that burden to our life or our homes. So that is again very, very difficult to happen, but that can happen when all these strategies that we have discussed, to prevent work stress can, they are implemented properly. What are the tips for cultivating work-life balance? For work-related stress, turn to co-workers. For family-related stress, turn to lean on friends and family members, and try and establish as many new satisfying friendships so that, there is a balance between work and life. Now, just a slide on, what is a danger zone. When work-life balance is out and when work stress sets in or work distress sets in, the telltale signs are fatigue, isolation, compulsivity, substance use. Dr. Gautam did speak about that. There's something called as curbside consultation also. So what is curbside consultation? Once that happens, you'll later end up, having depression, anxiety. What is curbside consultation? It's something like this, where if someone comes to you talking about the kind of stress that is going on in their workplace, and you give some solution to that. And, this person actually will be going to many people, to, seek solutions to the problems that are happening at his workplace. Basically, that is a sort of curbside consultation. So if that starts happening to a person or an employee, that means this is a danger sign. He's going to end up in some sort of mental health or, some non-communicable diseases later on. So thank you. I'll end my talk here so that, there's enough for the panel discussion later. Enough time for the panel discussion later.
Thank you, Dr. Sai Krishna Tika, for your insightful presentation on fostering workplace mental health. Your practical strategies, resilience, effective communication, and work-life balance offer invaluable guidance for creating healthier work environments. We appreciate your expertise and valuable contribution to this discussion. We will now open the floor for the Q&A session. If you have any question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask or use the chat box. Let's aim to keep the discussion focused and concise so we can address as many queries as possible within the time available. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question. So both were very informative talks. Firstly, Gautam sir spoke about TOS 16. Sir, for the benefit of all of us, can you tell us how TOS 16 is different from the other stress-related scales, and is it can we use it even among healthcare workers?
Thank you, Dr. Pachet, sir, for the question. So TOS 16 is different from other existing tools in the following ways. First, it's free. One. Second, it basically looks specifically for work-related stressors. It does not go into, because there are other stressors in life, relationships, death, and lots of so many other things are there. But this looks at work-related stressors, and it takes into account coping while they're trying to quantify work-related stress. Thirdly, it gives you a criteria to define different levels of harmful levels of work stress, mild, moderate, and severe. Fourth, it also gives you, takes into account, it asks the employees about whether they're having some psychosomatic symptoms, because normally people don't come and say, I have work stress. So the occupational health doctor will start seeing more cases of gastritis, more aches and pains, more number of leaves, fleeing. So it also takes into account whether these psychosomatic symptoms are commonly present and makes a matrix and filters out people who are having both higher stress scores as well as people with high amount of symptoms and tells them what to do. And fifth, this tool has been validated for Indian settings across multiple type of workplaces. And it's a generic tool. That is, it is not going to inquire about individual work process, but it addresses the key work stressors. And it is same across all the workplaces, whether it's healthcare industry or whether it's a factory, whether it's manufacturing sector, academic sector. So it does inquire the generic stressors. It can be used in healthcare settings. It is already being used. As far as I know, there are around 4 or 5 studies that are already using TOS to look at stress among nurses, doctors, among health administrators, that is the MS and DMS and those kind of stuff. So it can be used in health settings, but you can actually, if you want to understand in detail about individual work factors, there is scope for also change.
Thank you, sir, for that valuable information. So I have one question to Dr. Sai Tikka as well, sir. You mentioned many strategies to maintain well-being in the workplace. Example, altering acceptance to be assertive. So my question is, how does one practice this? How does one ensure that it becomes a part of our system or routine?
Yeah. So I think one we should know is whether our assertiveness, if for example, we take assertiveness into this question, if I being assertive will be taken positively or not. So if there are, say for example, orientation things that are happening in a workplace, that these are the things we're looking into, and we want our employees to be more assertive. We want them, to be, better effect, better in communication. So if they know that, I think as an individual, as an employee, I will be more confident of being assertive, of actually being more, I'll be more inquisitive. So if we know that at a higher level, this is what is expected of people among us, I'll be more assertive. I think we all have that assertiveness in us, but then we don't know whether that assertiveness will be taken in a positive light or not. So if that happens, I think it's easy for any individual to be more assertive. There are definitely, I know, it's a personality attribute. It's difficult for some people to be more assertive, but if that is known that this is a workplace where assertiveness is actually encouraged, so that shouldn't be a problem.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Any more questions? Please feel free or put in the chat box.
Are there any questions or comments you had like to share?
Hello.
Yes,
Sir, please, sir.
please.
Hello.
Yes, Dr. Shubhi?
Yeah, am I audible? I have a
Yeah,
question.
you're audible. Yeah.
Yes, sir. So first, I would like to appreciate both the speakers, Dr. Gautam sir and Dr. Sai Tikka sir. I really like the way your like topics are interlinked, and you have tried to provide the holistic approach to how to manage the strategies at workplace. My question is directed to Dr. Gautam. Sir, in one of the slides, you have shown the data in which the stressors has been managed in a company. I'm sure you're not able to take the name of the company, but for benefit of others, can you please share the interventional strategies that is being followed in the company so that it can be universally applied or we can try to apply it?
Thank you, Dr. Shubhi, for your question. And then it's due to shortage in time constraints, I will be very brief. I will just say that the company is having it's a huge presence all across the country. There are more than 30,000 employees in the company. And what they do is they didn't have a system of screening for work stress. So now what they have done is they have made a part of the annual periodical health examination of employees. They also include this self-reporting of TOS 16 to measure their work stress. And since they're already collecting lab data with respect to the metabolic and physiological parameters, they screen out people who are in the red category and they ask them to go to the occupational health center. And there, these employees are having a targeted interventions like screening for NCDs and those kind of things. In general, what they do is they conduct stress audit of these departments that are having high levels of work stress. And they try to understand whether it's due to work-related process or inadequate training. Every stress manifesting department will have its own reasons for the stress. So they try to have customized interventions for each of the reasons. Overall, in general, they have regular, because of this, they have regular induction trainings. Whenever there's upgraded, they have upgradation trainings. And then they have this a system of grievances where employees can actually report their grievances. And they've also introduced a system where volunteers from the industry are trained so they can identify people who are exhibiting some amount of distress and then take these people, act as a bridge between the occupational health center in the industry as well as this. Thirdly, they have also what they've done is they have outsourced the third-party agency for providing telephonic services for counseling. So they can get like tele-counseling services for their problems. Most important intervention is individual level interventions are there. They have all the facilities for exercise, diet, counseling, and those kind of things. But most importantly, they have stress audit and they try to rechange the workflow patterns. Though you cannot change all the workflow patterns, wherever it's possible, they change the workflow patterns. And since again next year they have the evaluation of stress, they get an objective quantifiable parameter as how much it has reduced over the years. So this is what they're doing. And every industry does in a different way.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I really thank you for keeping the toss in free in public domain. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you all for the interactive discussion. With this, we reach the end of the first segment. Once again, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our speakers, Dr. Gautam MS and Dr. Sai Krishna Tikka for their outstanding presentations in today's mental health dialogue. Now, let's move on to our next segment, the panel discussion. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Prachit R., Associate Professor in the Department of Epidemiology at the Center for Public Health, NIMHANS, and Dr. Lata K, Associate Professor in the Department of Mental Health Education, NIMHANS, who will be moderating today's discussion. They will also introduce our distinguished panelists. Over to you, sir and ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Vishak. So we have the second part, which is the panel discussion. And the topic for panel discussion is prioritizing mental wellness in the workplace. So let me quickly introduce our resource person. Just give me a moment. So our panelists include Dr. Paulomi Sudhir, Professor, Department of Clinical Psychology, and Dr. Gautam MS, Additional Professor, Department of Epidemiology in NIMHANS, and Dr. Merlin Joseph, Assistant Professor, Department of Community Health, St. John's Medical College, Bangalore. And we also had Dr. Sonia Pereira, who is the Professor and Head Department of Psychiatric Social Work and Dean Faculty of Medicine and Allied Health Sciences at Guwahati University. So unfortunately, due to personal reasons, Dr. Sonia couldn't be here. So firstly, let me quickly introduce Dr. Paulomi Sudhir, who is a professor in the Department of Clinical Psychology and who has numerous publications and research projects as well as awards in various aspects of clinical psychology and research. And then of course we have Dr. Gautam MS, who has already been introduced and who has delivered an insightful talk on stress in the workplace. And the third panelist is Dr. Merlin Joseph, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Community Health at St. John's Medical College. And she has worked very closely with the garment and electronic manufacturing industry and is the project coordinator for several service-based projects in India. And she has received several awards in the field of occupational health. This includes the Global Health Fellowship Award in the year 2023 by Fogati NIH. And she has more than 20 peer-reviewed publications to her credit. So welcome all the panelists here. So I request my colleague, Dr. Lata, who is an associate professor in the Department of Mental Health Education in NIMHANS, to kindly take this forward. Over to you, Dr. Lata.
Thank you, Dr. Pratik. I would like to thank the APEX team and the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare for giving us this opportunity to host the Mental Health Dialogue 6 and to conduct today's panel discussion on the theme of this year's World Mental Health Day, that is prioritizing workplace mental health. And I would like to start today's discussion by mentioning a quote by Noam Spencer, which mentions mental health is not a destination, but a process. So as we are aware that we have three distinguished panelists for today's panel discussion, I would now like to invite Dr. Paulomi Sudhir, who is professor at the Department of Clinical Psychology. Ma'am, as we all know that communication plays a key role in all our lives. And as a clinical psychologist, you will be interacting with individuals. And could you highlight on some of the important measures that employees can adapt to manage workplace emotions and also handling difficult interactions to ensure wellness while at work?
Ma'am, kindly unmute.
Yeah, please tell me if you can hear me now.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, you can, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, sorry, I think it went off to phone. So I'd just like to thank the organizers for inviting me to be a panelist on this occasion. And I think I enjoyed listening to both Dr. Gautam and Dr. Sai for their presentations, which I think meant a lot to understand work stress. Specifically, your question on the difficult interpersonal relationships at work and how can someone manage this, particularly affective experiences. I think we spend a lot of time at work, and I think many of our waking hours, particularly for those who are employed in organized workplace as well as otherwise, we're spending a lot of time at workplaces, and majority of us also spend a lot of time interacting with colleagues, interacting with people working with us and people that we work for also. So I think it's something that's unavoidable. We often don't choose whom we work with. Sometimes the workplace colleagues are also difficult because they also bring in various patterns of relating and so on. And the nature of our work and our interactions are also going to be likely contributors to these experiences. So affective experiences at workplace are very integral. The other thing, of course, related to affective work experiences before discussing the actual strategies is also the nature of work that we do. For example, if we are in healthcare or we are in service industries, a lot of times expressing emotions the way we would like to is not something that's very easy for us to do, nor is it very practical, because there's a lot of emotional labor and exhaustion that takes place when we have to regulate our emotions and interact. And I think this is also true in hierarchical organizations where we might be very upset with a senior or a officer we are reporting to, but we can obviously not say no or disagree with them or express ourselves. I think some of the strategies that were discussed earlier at an individual level will work. For example, assertiveness, effective communication in terms of expressing needs. But they may have limitations if we're looking at which workplace and where exactly we're applying them. And therefore, handling difficult interpersonal relations may not be just limited to communication skills, but also looking and seeking support from other colleagues or other members, including family and so on, to be able to identify and recognize what is the source of the stress, because some of these can have an impact on self-esteem and oneself, because it sort of builds up and then we have people actually responding. And we've seen this in defense forces, we've seen it in other places where difficult workplace relationships actually lead to very negative outcomes. So yes, while effective communication skills like expressing, segregating and separating and having boundaries, also expressing wherever possible, using means to take others help to communicate may be possible, but I would also express some caution in choosing which strategy and where you would actually use it.
Thank you, ma'am, for that comprehensive answer, and also highlighting about the importance of highlighting about the communication skills part, especially I think even Dr. Sai Tikka also mentioned the importance of communication skills as an important strategy for managing workplace emotions, and also for highlighting the individual level of responsibility. And also about the expressions, which also play an important role. So thank you, ma'am. Now we'll move on with the next panelist, Dr. Gautam. And it's not very simple or easy to actually undertake that. So, sir, with your vast experience of working in occupational health, could you highlight some of the important barriers or challenges faced by employees and also suggest some ways to overcome the same?
So I would, so first of all, I think I would like to express my gratitude to Dr. Poulami ma'am. She has been a strong support to us in this journey She was a resource person for all our training, for all the medical officers that we used to conduct in the department. And it's very nice to hear from ma'am again. Your question, should I take it as it's specific for work stress, or what challenges employees face to get
Yes, sir.
work stress related interventions for themselves? So one challenge is the employees actually don't know whether they're work stressed. So they don't have there's no inbuilt feedback mechanism for in most workplaces to have an informed way of telling employees that, look, you are having some amount of stress that is sort of abnormal or at a harmful level for your body, physiological composition and kind of roles in the organization that you do, and for your abilities to cope. So one of the main challenges is that there's no system of feedback to employees. One. Second thing is employees don't feel that it's sometimes working harder is considered to be a attribute of good performance, which actually is not the case. So people actually trying to observe that a hardworking employee is likely to be noticed, and so that is something they tend to shrug it off. That's one of the challenge, that is lack of awareness regarding work stress and its implications on self and families. Third thing is there is some amount of fear that they could lose their job or position or role, whatever is there. If they are trying to complain, they could be seemed as enabled to actually do the roles which is set upon by the management. Fourth is the employees. So there are some industries where the employees have some amount of social security in form of legislations and workplace policies and programs for their own thing. But there are many workplaces, like including our own medical field or including some academic institutions, they are not governed by specific laws and legislations that mandates them to have certain benefits A, B, C, D, and E. So that is a challenge for them employees, even if they want to realize that what they are eligible to or what they are deemed required for maintaining their health, but they don't have a legal backup to actually access it. That's one of the challenge. There are various challenges, but since you asked about the employee side of challenges, I think these are some of the very important challenges. And lastly is there's also some amount of resources required for the employee to actually perform what is being advised. I mean, it's easy to advise, but to put that advice into practice, sometimes it's not free all the time. So unless it is provided by the industry or the employee has means or resources to do what is expected from him. So there are various challenges, but I think in current situation, the challenges are more related to the means, the legislative backup, the policy backup, as well as the awareness and feedback mechanism. These are some important challenges that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. You have rightly put out some of the important aspects which are actually faced by the employees, including the awareness part, which is actually very, very important, and then the feedback and also the governing, because until unless we have certain policies and the guardrails in place, it becomes very, very crucial for anybody to actually oversee or to also have an overlook about the employees' wellness. So I would now like to move on with Dr. Merlin, who's a faculty at the Department of Community Health at St. John's. Ma'am, recently we came across a lot of discussions around menstrual leave and also safety at workplace. So with that background and with your personal experience on working in the field of occupational sectors with garments, health sector, and also smartphone industry, could you please share your experiences on measures to improve menstrual hygiene for women at workplace?
Yeah, so first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me for this wonderful dialogue concerning workplace mental well-being, and thanks to both the speakers before me. So yes, I am part of the Department of Community Health at St. John's Medical College, and also I head the Division of Occupation Health, which was previously headed by Dr. Bobby Joseph. And in our division, we conduct a lot of interventions which are factory-based, and rightly mentioned, one such intervention is in the garment industry. And the problem in the garment industry is that menstruation, there's a lot of, it's a female-based industry, so almost 80% of them are women. And it's an important contributor. Menstruation is an important contributor to sickness absenteeism, but there is always a culture of silence surrounding menstruation because it's still considered a taboo there. And because of the poor health literacy of the people who come from various backgrounds, they may not be literate or aware about menstrual hygiene practices. They come with the same kind of knowledge at the workplace, and that in turn hinders their productivity. That leads to worse presenteeism or even sickness absenteeism and productivity losses and so on. So what we did at the factory level as an intervention was to it's called the Sakhi project, where Sakhi means the friend. So we go in as friends and we recruit a group of people in the factory who will teach their other peers regarding menstruation and menstrual hygiene. So it was a multi-pronged approach. So we realized that just training the workers at the factory would not be enough. It will also mean that the supervisors or the management also needs to be attuned regarding the needs, specific needs of their women workers. So a separate set of trainings and sensitization was done for the factory supervisors and managers, as well as the male workers. Because we found that if in the factory, especially their supervisors, they don't generally allow for breaks in between work because the entire labor stops. So all this training regarding them, regarding allowing for breaks during work and taking care of the needs of the women workers were addressed. So also availability, facility-based improvements such as improving access to good quality restrooms and washrooms, access to water, soap in these factories, as well as access to clean menstrual products, because anecdotally we know that factories were notorious for using these kind of scraps and small waste materials which were used as menstrual products. So to avoid that, and then creating a culture where we talk about menstruation, and we gave them not only training on menstruation, but also on other related topics like nutrition, physical activity. And this was a multi-center approach. So we did it across 35 factories all over India. And it really showed an improvement in their health literacy, and hopefully would also lead to an improvement in their health-seeking behavior. So this is one example of improved menstrual hygiene practice, which we try to observe in the factories.
Thank you, Dr. Merlin.
Thank you.
For sharing your experiences about the Sakhi project, where you have mentioned that sensitizing even the male workers, which is very, very important, so that like they also understand and promote or avoid the sickness absenteeism because of the other issues for handling the menstrual hygiene related practices, and also for highlighting the access to various essential facilities, especially water, washrooms, and even the sanitary napkins and other basic facilities at workplace, and also for highlighting the importance of the physical health and also the mental health at workplace. So thank you, and I would now invite Dr. Prachet to take the next round of questions with the panelists.
Thank you, Dr. Lata, and it was indeed a very engaging first round. So moving on, now we go to the second and the final round here. So my question is to Dr. Pallavi ma'am. So ma'am, with your vast expertise in the field of workplace mental health, could you please throw some light on certain measures to promote work-life balance and its impact on the overall well-being of the employees?
Thank you for that question. I think that's very tricky to say work-life balance, which means that it's sometimes indicates a sort of a precarious balance. So a lot of literature talks about work life and non-work life, because there is life. Work also is life a bit, but there is also non-work life. And I think various ways of understanding what is work-life balance also takes us into how to actually improve it in terms of engagement in both areas, both in terms of how do we increase employee engagement at work, and how do we also look at fulfilling other role engagements outside of work. And all of us know that we are busy juggling both of it. Doesn't mean that actually one should suffer at the cost of the other, and sometimes it does happen. So in my work experience in terms of how to improve it, a lot of clients that we see obviously are working, they're employed adults who, like I said, spend a lot of time at workplace. But the difficulties they may be having is also the spillover of some of the work-related activities that go back home. And there could be a lot of factors, both personal as well as organizational factors. And many of the previous the talk that we had also suggested that it's not a one-time thing, that because I have a good work-life balance, there may not be a time later in life where this is sort of disturbed or upset. So it's a constant process of engaging with various roles that we are part of. So when we look at individual contributors to what upsets this balance, one may look at individual predictors in terms of, I think perfectionism was pointed out, also difficulties in keeping boundaries, maybe even skills at managing the work role itself, because of which one takes home a lot of work. A lot of times one is not able to assert and express that I will not be able to do this, and therefore ends up taking a lot of work. So those could be individual factors, including what could be positive otherwise, like a high degree of conscientiousness, for example, may result in a lot of stress as well as spillover the other way. Not being able to segment or segregate, look at that part is also one of the things. At the same time, I think organizational factors also impact, and many times this is not in the individual's control in terms of the work-life balance that is promoted. And work-life balance can also be disrupted by the organizational cultures that are present. So we see individuals who come in saying that we're expected to meet this deadline, and those are deadlines that are not at all possible to meet within this short, but somehow they're expected to meet. Otherwise, they're made to feel that they're not effective or they're not efficient enough. So sometimes role models in the organization also contribute to this disruption. Managing work-life balance, of course, is again something that we look at, because a lot of the stress management at the individual level is actually helping individuals develop skills to not just maintain this balance, but also get more satisfaction or larger life satisfaction beyond the workspaces. At home, it may be, or it may be with other colleagues or other social support systems. A lot of personal and professional self-care strategies, I think, becomes very important. And individual levels of flexibility, because sometimes it's the appraisal of the workplace or it's the appraisal of work relationships that contribute significantly to stress. Knowing that this will pass or this is something that I can cope with is the appraisal of that is very significant in actually reducing the experience of stress. So stressors, yes, but not all stressors may actually lead to a stressful experience if there is a positive reappraisal also. And I think finally, it's not one individual's effort in managing this balance. A lot of strategies by the organization, as has been pointed out, in terms of support for families, medical care facilities. It could be childcare support that the person is provided, leaves. All of these also eventually contribute to not just maintaining this work-life balance, but also making it more fulfilling in both life domains.
Thank you, ma'am, for highlighting the measures that may be adopted to maintain work-life balance and also measures for employee engagement. And you also spoke about boundary management, which is the need of the hour. Thank you, ma'am. Moving on, my next question is to Gautam, sir. Sir, you've been a part of several research studies and programs related to workplace mental health. Could you please share some of your experiences and shed some light on some of the important interventions to identify and prevent burnout, which is not often spoken about, burnout among employees at workplaces?
So thank you, Dr. Prachit, for the question. And so burnout is basically a more severe spectrum of in the work stress, the spectrum that basically pushes the person into a sort of a disorder, towards a disorder kind of thing. But I have they I have not come across programs that are basically trying to address burnout, in the sense that they may actually call it as a kind of assessment of work stress, and they do have some trainings for burnout. But there are some interventions that I've seen have proven to be effective. That is based on the definition of effectiveness, because the effectiveness can be based on indicators that are related to employee level and some indicators that are related to organization level. Sometimes the organization level indicators may have improved, but there wouldn't be much changes on individual level in some of the employees, because the organization will measure in terms of reduced stress levels, improved productivity, return on investment, and those kind of things. Individual, that is change in the stress scores, improvement in physiological parameters, and then their better expression of work-life balance and those kind of things. One of the things that I've seen, I wouldn't like to name the company, is basically when the company had a sort of a what we call it was possible because it was more of a monotonous work in that company and a similar kind of work where it was possible for people to switch roles between different kinds of monotonous work, between a different kinds. The work was different, but it was monotonous in all places. So in order to one of the expression of the companies was that day in and day out in an 8-hour shift, they are expected to do the same thing, and because of that, they're having problems. And then so they did multi-component strategies where they tried to address the monotony. Then there was a lot of issues with respect to social security. They addressed the issue of social security. Then there were issues with respect to about people having no one to express themselves. So they actually got in touch with a third party to provide these sort of services for the employees. Lastly, they started role modeling and also some sort of incentivization related projects as a part of the larger employee assistance programs. So these kind of things, especially the change in monotony, help people recover to some extent from burnout, to some extent. And they also shifted some of the people who were little more educated to a sort of desk job and administrative related roles, and then further brought them back to the assembly line and those kind of things. But to be frank to your question, Dr. Parshit, I have really not come across companies that have really documented a significant improvement in burnout in a quantitative terms, both at employee level indicators as well as the organization level indicators. But efforts are ongoing, and people have done good jobs. And so I'm really sorry that I really cannot give a concrete evidence that published evidence that it has proven to be really effective from whatever I've seen in the limited factories, industries, and academic workplaces that I've seen. But these strategies are something that I've known to work. They have actually brought changes, but those changes have not been published to say it as an evidence that can be used elsewhere for them to replicate the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you, so for throwing some light on some of the efforts that have been undertaken by organizations to address burnout among employees. Of course, to break monotony, switching roles is one step, or even a third party to ventilate or express incentivization. These are some steps that may be undertaken to address burnout among the workers. Now moving on to Dr. Merlin, questions to Dr. Merlin. So as a community health expert who's heading the occupational health division at St. John's, could you please highlight some important policies and programs to ensure workplace mental health? And further, what are the key roles and responsibilities for the organization from an organization's perspective to ensure wellness of the employees?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I think one thing we need to know before I go into the meat of that question is So 90% of our workers are in the unorganized sector and only 10% are working in the organized sector. So most of the things that I will be mentioning will be catering to the 10% of the workers which are there. And so first thing which has come, the policies and the acts following the National Mental Health Survey, which NIMHANS played a very important role. We found that almost 10% of the adults have some kind of mental health issue. And as a fallout of that, we had the National Mental Health Program and specifically the District Mental Health Program, where the district act as a place or a fulcrum around which mental health services like suicide prevention, workplace stress management, and those kinds of activities were provided. But there is also the Mental Health Care Act of 2017, which focused upon mental health care in the general population as well as in the organized sector. And they talked about importance of creating mentally healthy workplaces and environments and so on, and reduce stigma at the workplace. Now, which is not correctly or totally focused on mental health. There are other acts which indirectly improve the mental well-being of the workers, like, of course, the Factories Act of 1948, which mandates and talks about the leaves and the working hours, and also the kind of benefits that the women workers get. And these also indirectly contributes to well-being at the workplace. We also have the ESI, which is for mainly the people who are working in factories and earning less than 21,000 rupees per month. So for them, there is the maternity benefit, there is the sickness benefit, and mental health also is covered under the ESI scheme. And also we have the mental, for especially if you're talking about maternity benefit and women per se, we have the Maternity Benefit Act. So every woman who's pregnant is entitled to 26 weeks of paid maternity leave. And that also contributes to better feelings of well-being in the workplace. And other smaller minor things like availability of a creche facility for at least 30 women, there should be creche facility so that burden of childcare and sickness, absenteeism and all can be reduced. And it also improves their well-being at the workplace. There is also the POSH Act in 2013, so prevention of sexual harassment. So because of that, women feel safer to work, or not just women, but workers feel safe, and creates a culture of safety in the workplace. And these are all certain acts and policies which are keeping in mind the well-being of the workers. I can also think about like a national level, which can also apply to our unorganized sector, is the Ayushman Bharat insurance scheme. So all of them are entitled to 5 lakhs of insurance coverage per family, and that also covers the mental health care as well as the medications which will be used for mental health illnesses. So these are some schemes and policies which are there, which the government provides to improve the mental health, and not per se in the workspace, but general mental well-being. Now, if you look at what can an organization do to promote its culture, firstly, I would like to, as already reiterated by Dr. Gautam and Dr. Paulomi, it's very important to create a culture where people feel that there is this culture of being heard at the workplace, and people feel valued at the workplace. So creating such a fair and transparent work culture would go a long way. And for that, the employees should be able to voice their concerns, their complaints. Then they should have, they can also in certain workplaces, they have team building activities. There is promoting inclusivity among the women. So as already mentioned, I've talked about having creche facility, or promoting, giving promotions on time, rewarding good performance, and also provision of counseling service. So if you look at mental health per se, assessment of mental health is never done in the factories or in the workspace. So I think we should use tools like Dr. Gautam mentioned about the TOS tool, which can assess stress, or even burnout tools which are available. We need to assess who are the workers who are stressed. So that is not being done. That can be something which can be cultivated. And after assessment, providing counseling services, and of course, maintaining this confidentiality of the work worker, but providing good counseling services at the workplace itself. Stress management workshops can be conducted by the organization. So not only focusing on stress, they can encourage, talk about how to solve problems, conflict resolution, and as mentioned earlier about resilience, and those kinds of smaller things can be promoted at the workplace. Now, of course, after the pandemic, we've looked at workplace flexibility, timings. A lot of people are have loved the idea to work from home. So even encouraging that as for people who can work from home, whose work allows it. Of course, for doctors, we could not do it, but many of the workers can do it. So allowing this flexible working hours also is important. And these are some measures which the organization can do to definitely promote worker well-being.
Thank you, ma'am, for your insights. So, of course, other than the National Mental Health Program and Mental Health Care Act that's already existing, we have several other initiatives which you have highlighted, several other policies, and you've nicely put out what can organizations do to improve the mental well-being of the employees. It could be team building, rewarding, or incentivization, promoting them on time, and assessment of mental health stress, something which we don't normally do. Before an employee joins or at periodic intervals, we are mandated to undergo a physical examination, but nobody talks about stress or mental health. So that's something that one can ponder about or include it in the future. And of course, you spoke about having an inclusive environment, gender inclusivity. So thank you for your valuable points. And yeah, Paulavi ma'am, if you have something to add. Please.
I just thought I'd add on burnout, because I think what we need to understand is healthcare professionals, particularly some kind of healthcare professionals, are more likely to experience burnout, particularly what we call compassion fatigue also. And some of the signs are very difficult to detect, but then being very cynical, increased negativity, and those can actually spill over to other people at workplaces. So I think I've seen in one employee particularly that actually she came because she was in a counseling setup, and her senior actually told her, now you need to go on leave because you're not just your mental health is also getting affected. So people may not recognize that they're experiencing burnout, but it may spill over to workplace as well as to home in terms of that negativity, and can have very serious effects on the individual's mental health as well. So some of the interventions have looked at mindfulness-based stress reduction, looking at developing more self-compassion and reduce self-criticality, and looking at where responsibility may end, particularly in some kinds of even medical professionals where the outcomes are extremely beyond their control. So I think those probably can be looked at specifically for burnout.
Thank you, ma'am, for speaking about those interventions, burnout. So really appreciate it. So on that note, we've come to the end of this insightful panel discussion on promoting wellness among employees in the workplace. So I would like to thank our esteemed panelists, Dr. Paulavi Sudhir, Professor, Department of Clinical Psychology in MHANS, Dr. Gautam MS, Additional Professor of Epidemiology in MHANS, and Dr. Merlin Joseph, Assistant Professor and Head of Occupational Health Division, St. John's Medical College. And I would like to thank Dr. Lata for moderating this panel discussion. So, do we have any questions from the audience, members of the audience?
You can please raise hand or put on the chat.
Either you could unmute yourself, feel free, or yeah, we have one. Ma'am, if you could please unmute yourself.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, like recently in the news, it was there about the workplace stress and the girl finally passed away. So are there any studies done on such cases wherein this sort of outcome is there? Have you done studies? Hello?
Yeah, I think you were referring to some studies on workplace stress, on the negative. implications
Yes.
or, okay. So would any of our experts like to answer that?
Hi, ma'am. Yes, definitely. There have been studies on workplace stress, and they have looked at industry specific. So if we look at the medical industry, per se, there were several studies done on the nursing burnout and nurse stress, on doctors, and especially which category of doctors are specifically stressed. Also, if you're looking at industries, yes, there have been several studies which are done on garment. As far as I know, there are studies done on that. But after these studies, I don't think much has changed. That's what would like to reiterate, that many things they are studied upon. We have found that because people are spending almost 1/3 of their lives at workplace, and that is one very good place where we can intervene and change things. But still, despite identifying these stresses and points, nothing much has changed. But yes, studies have been done in the past.
Thank you, ma'am, for that question, and thank you, Dr. Merlin.
I think one of the
Thank you
things
for
that
the wonderful
what she was
Yes, ma'am,
referring to,
please follow me, ma'am.
yeah, I think what she was referring to also was the recent incident that
Correct,
where a young
recent
Yes, the
person,
recent
yeah,
incident,
but I
yeah.
incident
thought,
that led
yeah,
to the death
yeah.
of
I think
healthcare
what we
providers.
also need to remember when we talk about stress and work stress and mental health is also some individuals having already existing vulnerabilities are at greater risk. So I think at workplaces, it may be important to identify who might be vulnerable, particularly during stressful periods, if that can be done. Second, I think what was also highlighted, and probably we don't know of all the details, but certain lifestyle factors like, reduced sleep, dietary changes that happen. It's not directly work stress, but the effects work stress can have on lifestyle factors, particularly because even for students and other populations where one is just pushing sleep time, and sleep, has a lot of restorative function. So those are compromised, then I think the effects can be that much more damaging also. So ensuring some of those can happen at workplace as well.
Thank you, ma'am, for sharing your thoughts. Yes, I think Dr. Gautam's talk also mentioned that optimum sleep and as well as changes in the diet, which may have serious repercussions. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your insight. So yeah, we had a great panel discussion and overall very informative mental health dialogue 6.0. This is the sixth session with the theme mental health in workplace. So at the outset, I would like to thank all our resource persons for accepting our invite, all the esteemed speakers, Dr. Sai Tikka, Dr. Gautam, Dr. Paulomi ma'am, Dr. Merlin Joseph. Thank you all for accepting our invite, sparing your valuable time and sharing your expertise and knowledge with us. So I would like to thank our Director and Registrar of NIMHANS and the entire administration for their unstinted support. I thank our entire NMHS2 team led by Dr. Girish, Dr. Vivek Benadal, and Dr. Jay Surya, and all the project staff for their cooperation and good work. I extend my gratitude to the members of the audience, all of you. We had around 60 of them who joined, and people from a diverse background. I could see that Dr. Gururaj, Senior Professor of Epidemiology and former Director of Math, had also joined. We had the Deputy Director of Mental Health, Dr. Rajini ma'am, who had also logged in for some time. And of course, we had, like I said, diverse participants, people from mental health background, people who are working in the NMHS to join us. Thank you all for being a very good audience. And on that note, we end this mental health dialogue webinar. So we'll be back again 2 months later with another very important topic pertaining to mental health. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Just a minute before we part ways, I request all of you to please turn on your videos. We can have a small selfie. Vishak?
Yes.
Vishak or Sheryl, can you please take the selfie once everybody turns their videos on?
Yeah, sure, sir. Will do.
Yeah. Once again, please turn on your cameras, your videos. We'll have a quick selfie. Yeah, once again, we thank you all for joining. Have a good day. Goodbye. And see you again after 2 months. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.